Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, YouGov produces a poll giving Labour a humongous lead of 30 points over the Conservatives. I'd like to take a look at what Isaac Levido, the Tory chief strategist, has been telling Conservative MPs in order to stop them hyperventilating. So yes, there was a new poll out yesterday from YouGov, massive boost for Labour with a 30-point lead. So yeah, if you if you see any Tory MPs out today, give them a hug. They're not feeling too well. But before anyone gets too excited, it won't be real, at least not as a predictor for the general election. These things bounce up and down a lot, and this will just be a big up that comes back down soon enough. If it's anything at all, it's just a post-local election boost. But it will not be comfortable for Tory MPs. The electoral calculus projection would mean the Tories win just 13 seats. All of the very worst characters on the Tory benches would be gone, including almost the entire cabinet. Sunak would be gone, Hunt would be gone, Patel would be gone, Fabricant would be gone, Francois gone, Rees-Mogg gone, Truss gone, Jenrick gone, Braverman, oh, is she gone? The Tories wouldn't simply not be the main opposition. They'd be in fourth place. Happy days, but this is not the likely outcome without a real concerted effort on tactical voting. It is possible, but you have to have a lot of tactical voting here. This poll is not really what we think is reflecting electoral reality as things stand, but I must confess to a little bit of schadenfreude at thinking how Conservative MPs must be reacting to this, because it's worth pointing out. I will just point out, so Beyond Top Line, the polling analyst, noted that although it looks a bit extreme, this poll, if you plug these latest polling into the calculator and you look at it for Blackpool South, which we just had a by-election for, actually this latest poll predicts the Blackpool South result that we got, at least for the major players, very, very closely. So there's that, and that should worry Conservative MPs as well. And then we could look at some other things like Savanta, for example, another pollster, not quite at the same level as YouGov, but they're a decent pollster. They got a lot of plaudits for being bang on with the London mayoral race and a few other contests last week. So even if we look at their most recent polling, which isn't actually all that recent, that's some weeks ago now, it still puts the Conservatives on 132 seats. Now, okay, that's way better than 13 seats, like 10 times better, in fact. But it's a record low in terms of election results. And that is one of the kindest pollsters to the Conservatives. No matter which way you look as a Conservative MP, there's no succor to be found. The election results are going to be somewhere between their worst ever, and this is a party that's been around for like 200 years. It's going to be somewhere between their worst ever result, that's the best case scenario, and total annihilation. Because the day before, I think, they were invited to attend an election debrief with Isaac Levido, who is the party's chief strategist. The copium was flowing. Levido was clearly acting not as an analyst for this meeting, but a PR official. He told them that the Sky News Thrasher analysis, the one that, you know, they said pointed to a hung parliament. He said, oh, that's the correct analysis. That's the correct analysis. That Professor Thrasher was the professional, and that Professor John Curtis, who had not said this, was actually merely a political commentator. Pay him no mind. In reality, Professor Curtis is the most respected polling analyst in the country and has been for a very long time. Doesn't make him infallible. But if you've got a problem with his conclusions, and I occasionally do, you'd better have a really good reason. You do not simply dismiss him as merely a political commentator. That's my job. As for Thrasher, I've already explained how his ridiculous analysis was fundamentally wrong, aimed at clicks rather than informing the public. But you don't need to take it from me. Every pollster in the land has swung behind Curtis on this one. The reason, of course, being that there's a greater spread of candidates who can be successful in local elections. The Greens and Lib Dems are seen as more viable in local elections. They can actually win in a lot of places, and independents do very well as well. This does not occur in general elections. In addition, Reform UK only stood in about 1 in every, 8 seats? Now, if they stand everywhere at the general election, as they claim they will be, at least everywhere the Tories are standing, then this will pull the Conservative vote down further. So this hung parliament analysis based on Thrasher's assessments is completely wrong. Actually, being fair, Thrasher's analysis was not actually wrong. It was the conclusion that there would be a hung parliament. His analysis was, in fact, basically the same as everyone else's, including Professor Curtis's. And I seriously doubt that Professor Thrasher genuinely thinks that mapping a small local election onto general elections via uniform national swing, which everyone knows is rubbish, is a sensible thing to do. It will be because Sky wanted to push that line to raise excitement. He's just going along for it because they're paying him. In fact, I've seen Professor Curtis in a podcast saying that the BBC, for whom he did his analysis, made the editorial decision to be credible with the conclusions they presented this year. I guess Sky thought, nah, I need the clicks, mate. Curtis also said the Tories have a 1% chance of winning, and he's explained how he arrived at this figure. So what he did is he looked at the current polling, at the time he was speaking anyway. He assumed the most extreme narrowing of the poll. So various elections we don't actually always have a narrow of the poll, but we often get a narrowing of the poll. And he looked at the year when it was the most extreme. And he said, like, let's assume we get as extreme a narrowing of the poll as we've ever seen. And he also assumed the most extreme polling error we've ever had, which from 1992. And he assumed both of those things to be just as extreme as they ever have been in the past and in favour of the Conservatives. And even then, it still didn't give the Conservatives the ability to remain in government. And the chances that the Conservatives do get a record swing towards them and that the polls have this record error against the Conservatives, when the Conservative government is as obviously unpopular as it is right now, and looking at the results of local and by-elections, it's frankly ridiculous to say that the Conservatives stand any chance at all. The 1% is generous. If Levido were to tell Conservative MPs the truth, or at least something credible, he could say Labour's lead is probably not as large as some pollsters have it. He could claim, more viably, that Reform UK are simply not translating polling into actual results. And there are reasons why that is. I've talked about them before. I'd like to dig a little deeper at some point before the election. But for now, I'll say Reform UK derive their support from people seeing them on the mainstream media, who should not be platforming them to the extent they are. Frankly, George Galloway's Workers' Party is, or was at least in these elections last week, more electorally successful than Reform UK. The media should actually calibrate themselves to give slightly less attention to Reform UK than they do the British Workers' Party. But the point is that Reform UK can't get results in line with their polling because they don't really have a campaign operation. The media are doing their campaigning for them. You know, Reform UK, they've done okay in a couple of recent by-elections where you could argue they could focus all of their limited efforts. But in the local elections, they fell flat. Come the general election, the same's likely to happen. I mean, they're contesting nearly twice as many seats in the general election, they say, than they did in the local elections. They don't have the strategist. They don't have the councillor network. They don't have the boots on the ground. You know, just the general capacity to contest so many seats at once, where are they going to get it from? And as I say, they only contested 323 seats at the local elections. They reckon they're going for over 600 at the general election. Good joke. But even that would not persuade Conservative MPs that they stood any chance. Like, even if you add the Reform UK vote to the Conservative vote, and remember, not all Reform UK voters are going to vote Tory if Reform stand down, it still doesn't get them anywhere near a hung parliament. In fact, if Levido wanted to be really truthful, he could have actually just told Conservative MPs that Reform UK, that the problem of Reform UK was entirely their fault for playing silly buggers with fake asylum plans. If you did add up all the Reform and Conservative votes, actually hasn't fallen that far since Johnson was booted out. It's not much difference. It's fallen a bit. It was always going to fall a bit after the economic collapse that we've had. But what's happened is they've just leaked votes to Reform UK. If they'd kept them in their box by focusing on real policies, They wouldn't need to be facing the abyss like this. But as it is, Levido has chosen to just help Sunak out by pissing on his MP's shoes and tell them it's raining. More fool those who are believing someone who is clearly motivated to calm MPs down in order to keep them focused on the campaign rather than losing hope, and ignoring the analysis of literally every independent pollster and polling analyst in the country. But I do wonder how many Tory MPs really are believing Levido at this point, because I gather that Nadhim Zahawi, the former tax-dodging Chancellor of the Exchequer, had attended this meeting with Levido himself. And the next morning, he wrote a letter saying he was standing down at the election. So he doesn't sound like he was convinced at all, does he? Maybe a lot of other Tory MPs are thinking, yeah, we're basically bound, and now our own analyst is lying to us. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.